Okay guys, so for today's video, I basically wanted to cover both my mobility routine because a lot of people asked about that. And I also want to cover a few things that were brought up in the comments section of the last video. With the first being, uh, basically I'm going to give a rundown of what degree does it make as far as staying natural and your longevity in terms of the sport of powerlifting, getting stronger, and just weight training in general. Because one of the questions that came up, or one of the comments I should say that came up was, I'm so glad to be natural. I'm 36 years old and I've never been as strong and as muscular as I am now. I don't think I even reached my peak yet. Probably in my 40s. So this is something I want to comment on because it got a lot of upvotes and it's something I can relate to as far as having gone down the road of the enhanced side of things at age 20. I was only 20 years old when I hopped on anabolic steroids and I ran them until I was 29 years old. And now that I'm 34, I thought I could give some perspective on this and shed some light on it. So I do think being natural would lessen your potential injury history because it would just be slower progress. Your body would be able to keep up with most, specifically the tendons, the joints, all that sort of thing. But at the same time, what I want to get at is that someone's longevity in the sport, that time span of how long can they get stronger, it has more to do with how long you've been lifting than even going on PEDs or staying natural. So I can kind of put this in the context of I started training when I was 13, 14 years old, bench, abs, all that sort of stuff, got more serious, got into powerlifting, and then really pushed it up until this last couple of years. I pushed the strength as high as I could take it, as aggressively as possible. And really, from what I've seen with my own experiences and with clients I've trained over the years, and I've trained everyone all over the spectrum. I've trained plenty of guys who just do TRT. I've trained a lot of guys who are enhanced and run cycles as I did. And I train still probably a majority of the lifters over the years have been completely lifetime natural. And what I've seen is there's really appears to be about a 15-year period where, up to a 15-year period, I should say, where you can train rather heavy. You can push the main lifts, the squat, bench, the deadlift. You can push them really high and make pretty good progress on them without plateauing or running into debilitating injuries that make it to where you're no longer able to progress them. And I've seen it. It's not even necessarily a black and white thing as far as drugs versus natural. It's more a matter of how long have you been lifting, how long have you been pushing those lifts. So I feel like no matter how young you are, how old you are, it has more to do with the wear on the tires, so to speak. So if you have more, if you have a car with 200,000 miles, it's not going to perform as well, and it's not going to do so well compared to a car starting out with, no mileage or even at 50,000 miles. It's got a lot more years to push. And I have a 75-year-old woman I train, and she got into powerlifting not all that long ago. I want to say within the last 5 to 10 years, maybe closer to 5. And she's still progressing at 75. She just pulled 347. So and she started super late. She started, well into her 60s. So that goes to show, like, it is more a matter of how long do you have where you can push before the mileage accrues and your body's kind of worn down. And that's what I think is one thing we have to keep in mind. So I've heard a lot of people make the argument of, I'm going to wait till later to run a cycle, or I'm going to maximize my natural base. And I think that does have some merit, but I also think you got to look at the length of time you're going to have to push. And the other thing that comes up, where I know this was kind of the case for myself, if you look at my career and you look at a lot of these other big names who come up, how long do these guys last, these bigger names? They're crushing it. What the time frame we see repeatedly over and over is these guys are crushing it when they're teenagers, their late teens, when they're early 20s, even some into their upper, older 20s, their upper 20s. And what happens a lot of times is the mileage starts to accrue where they started lifting at age 13 or so, and they get to be 25, 28, and they hit that 15-year mark of training, and the injuries have ramped up. They're closer to their genetic potential because you can't keep progressing forever. I mean, we've seen that with guys like, I could name various people, but you can't keep progressing forever, basically. So they get to that point and they kind of hit the wall. Injuries, things slow down, and you get to a point with your training where basically it takes a much greater time investment to put 5-10 pounds on a lift. So you'll get to these progressively higher weights, and the point of diminishing return goes way up, where you're putting in way more time, way more effort, way more energy to get a little bit stronger, and it becomes too much. And then you get to this point where you're nearing 30 and you may settle down. You may end up married, you may end up with kids, you have a job now, you have much greater responsibilities to where you can't devote that same amount of time to training. So these are the various factors that impact why people slow down, more or less. And I got to hand it to you guys, like some of you guys who have super busy schedules. I have clients in this boat, and we have to be as efficient as possible with the training. We have to come in and dial down the training time to maybe upwards of an hour tops, maybe even 45 minutes, 35 minutes. I've talked about this. I have guys where it's like we're trying to be as efficient as we can, maximize the time. 35-minute sessions on a more consistent basis. We go in, we knock them out, we get it done. And you may get to that point where you have to do that. So those are the factors that I feel like play a greater role than just PEDs in general. But PEDs certainly lead to more injuries over time. I don't think these injuries are huge setbacks, though. I mean, I've had partial tears of my adductors, my quads, pecs on various occasions, many different areas. I've had these partial tears, rotator cuff, but you can still almost continue to progress. They're not things that shut you down long term. Like the back issues I have now after 20 years are much more debilitating to where the progress isn't coming as rapidly, and that's part of the thing. So I'm always a proponent of someone staying drug-free long term. I think that's the way to go. But I also train many guys who run cycles, and I have the experience where I can help with that as well. So it's just, I think from a health standpoint, obviously not being on PEDs is going to be healthier, and that's where I come in and say, we have to have an out with this. We have to have a period where at a certain age you're not going to do it, or you're going to do it in the smartest manner possible, in the most efficient way, and try to do cardio and do all these things to mitigate the damage, regular blood work, all that sort of stuff. But I think overall, my basic summary of this is how long you've been training has more to do with it than anything as far as when you peak and how your progress goes. But that was a really interesting comment. I'm glad we could touch on that. Another comment, the second one I want to touch on. When you get older, health is the biggest luxury you could ever have. It beats money and power by far. And this is so interesting now because in our 20s, we're very short-sighted. I was willing to basically put my body through anything at the cost of getting stronger. And that was the goal. Like, I didn't care what I necessarily went through, how hard I was on my body. I was living fast and running way more higher doses, more compounds than what we see now. And who knows how transparent people are about that sort of stuff nowadays. But I feel like everyone has gotten smarter about what they're doing with that, and just do it in a much safer manner. Not that I would say it's ever truly safe, but I agree. Like, now that I'm 34, it's at a point where I'm prioritizing health to a much greater degree. I've downsized. Almost everyone, the trajectory of life is to downsize over time. Everyone starts out and they want to get huge and strong as possible, and then I feel like you get a certain point in life, you get a certain point where maybe you have a health scare and you want to downsize. And I was walking around 250 pounds most of the time at 6 feet tall. I got up to 262 pounds. High blood pressure was a thing. Sleep apnea was a thing. And I just didn't want to deal with that long term. I didn't want to have to rely on a CPAP. I wanted to be healthier. I wanted to be able to run and have cardio and all this sort of stuff. So over time, I've downsized now to 200 pounds. That's what I weighed this morning. That's where I've been at, and I'm running marathons. I'm doing all sorts of different stuff. And I touched on in the last video, I'm a lot weaker. But One thing for me even that put this into perspective was I had a massive like 24 millimeter kidney stone in my left kidney that I had to have surgery on 2 different occasions. And this kidney stone cost me like $8,000 to have these 2 surgeries, and that was with insurance. And just that alone, you're like the hospital bills you get from having issues. Not to say that they're all avoidable. That's one reason to take care of yourself. Among other things, just quality of life. Like as we get older, we want to be there for our family, our kids, and all that, and just maximize our quality of life. Because I know, like Peter Attia talks about health span versus lifespan, and health span is how long can you live to where you're able to do the things you want to do and be and enjoy life to the maximum. So that's kind of where I'm at with that, and I completely agree with this comment. Like money and power are things that are of youth in a sense. Like I do think it's important to save for retirement and all that kind of stuff and work on that. But I cared about fame, I cared about power, I cared about attention and money and all that when I was in my 20s, and now I really couldn't care less. You can't take it with you. Like when we leave this earth, and I think, in my opinion, if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, if you've repented and all that, you're going to go to heaven. And we can't take this stuff with us. We can pass some of these things on to our children and maximize our time while we're here, but money doesn't move the needle on happiness as much as people think. And that's one thing I've realized as I've gotten older. There has to be a much greater balance to how much time are you putting into different things. Just as I can't work out for 4 hours a day, I can't work out for 3 hours a day. I cut it down to training every day, but doing so in a reasonable time frame. My lifting is much shorter, much less than it used to be. And that's because I need to still put time into my work, into the gym, my clients, into my daughter, my 3.5-year-old, into my wife, into getting other stuff, prioritizing other things, the Bible, reading the Bible, praying to the Lord, just putting that stuff in my brain. And so there's a give and take to it all, to where you can't get so locked in on one thing that you lose sight of everything else. And it's easy to do. It's something I've done at various times. And the problem with that is, like, to get really good at any one thing, you almost have to let other things suffer. You have to put more time and energy into that one thing. But everything will suffer. So as I've gotten older, I've learned balance is a greater thing, to where you want to be more well-rounded. You don't want to put everything into one thing. And that's kind of a shift you'll get going from youth to older. And so that was an interesting point I wanted to touch on as well. As far as the stretching routine, I'm going to put that throughout the video, and it kind of goes in order, to where I always start out with the frog stretch with banded hip distraction. So I have impingement on my right hip, and I put the band, I loop it over there to distract and allow me to open that hip up better. So that's one thing. The frog stretch improves internal hip rotation. That's what I always start with. Then I go on to the hip flexor bench stretch, which is my favorite stretch, period. Opens up the hip flexors to a huge degree. And if you hold a bar or like a squat rack in front of you, you can actually get a lot more out of this, to where you can get a deeper stretch. Then I go to the lacrosse ball on my TFL glute medius area to open that up, which helps with external hip rotation. And then I go to the piriformis bench stretch, which again helps with external hip rotation. Then I do the butterfly stretch, I do the splits stretch, the standing hamstring stretch, and then the 90-90 stretch for internal hip rotation. So a lot of this is hip related, hamstring related, adductors, all that kind of stuff. And it sounds like a lot. It's 8 stretches, 8 movements, but it has helped me so much as far as my everyday life, being able to move, as far as quality of life, just having less pain, being able to tie my shoes easier, simple things like that. So I think it's well worth doing, and you can get this down to where it's 10 minutes a day tops, and you'll notice differences. Then the more I do it, the better it gets. The better I feel, the further I can get, the better mobility and all that sort of stuff. So I'll include the video footage of that as well. And I appreciate you guys. Comment, subscribe to the channel, give it an upvote. I appreciate the huge response on the last video. I will try to keep the videos coming. Thank you so much, and God bless.